My theory is that because this happened just after she got what she wanted, which was to let the church allow her to run her own order. She was a very ambitious woman. The church used to suspect her of ambition and pride and overzealousness. It was just after she got permission to start in 48 or so that she had this meltdown. And I think the whole life that people think they admire so much, of her endlessly working herself to death, apparently, her tremendously ostentatious austerity, professions of poverty, almost masochistic, all of this turns out to be nothing but an attempt to drown out the demons. And the church knew very well that this woman who they were using because she was such good publicity didn't really believe a word of it. So I think it was very cynical on their part.
What kind of reaction did you get to the missionary position?
Overwhelmingly positive, to a surprising extent, because a lot of Catholics know that there's a danger of fanaticism and excessive zeal, and it's the greatest danger the church has ever had to face. And she was a perfect example of it. I'll give you an instance. The church, everybody knows, regards the unborn child as a real thing, as a person, so to say, and abominates abortion. As a matter of fact, that's my own view as well. I think the concept unborn child is embryologically correct, and that's what it is. I think abortion is abhorrent and should be avoided wherever possible. But Mother Teresa, when she got the Nobel Prize for Peace, went to Stockholm. You have to make a speech. You can't just pick up the check. You've got to say something. It has to be about peace. She said, I've discovered the greatest threat to world peace. The greatest threat to world peace is abortion. Now, nobody thinks that. It's impossible to think that. That's a crazy thing to say. It's beyond fanatical. The church doesn't demand it of you. People will think, good God, the woman's gone round the bend. That's what I mean.
Christopher Hitchens, I want to show you this picture.
Oh, and then the second thing, is this. It's very important. People misunderstand all the time. She was not a friend of the poor. She was a friend of poverty. She liked poverty. She thought it was good for people. She told people to think of it as a gift from God, and she made sure that they stayed poor because she preached against the only thing that can abolish poverty, which is the empowerment of women. Give women some control over their own reproductive cycle, particularly with contraception. Give them a chance to get off the wheel of a husband who forces annual pregnancies on them, many of which are going to die. You do that, you can raise the floor of the poorest village in Bolivia or Bangladesh. She spent all her life trying to make sure that could not happen. So a lot of people are much poorer and much sicker and much less well educated and much less happy than they would have been if she had never come on the scene.
Is that an argument in favor of capitalism?
Not on its own, it isn't. Though, because capitalism doesn't always insist on the empowerment of women, but if anyone's interested in the alleviation of poverty, that is the only thing we know definitely works, is giving women control over their reproduction.
I want to show you this picture, Christopher Hitchens. This is in the Washington Post Style section yesterday, and it's a woman praying at the memorial for Diana in England. What do you think about that? What's your reaction to that?
Well, that's exactly what I say about the sickly influence of religious cultism. It leads to man-made, well, I'll back up. I think all religious cults are man-made, and they've created false objects of worship, mythical, legendary ones. When you see it happening in front of your eyes, you can see how it got started. There you see it happening in front of our eyes. We think that's grotesque, or I expect most people do. What are you doing? Praying to an image of a basically disco dancing princess. But it's no more absurd than saying that you think Joseph Smith dug up some gold plates in upstate New York that had angelic writing on them, which is one of the front runners for the Republican nomination, claims he believes, or the cargo cults of Polynesia, or the belief that that after several hundreds of thousands of years of indifference, heaven waited till 2,000 years ago to conduct a human sacrifice in Palestine so that we could be forgiven our sins. I mean, as I say, if you believe this kind of thing, you'll believe anything, and you might as well make a goddess of Princess Diana.
Springfield, Illinois, you're on with Christopher Hitchens.
Good morning, Peter and Christopher.
Morning.
You were recently on a book panel where your co-panelist, Jonathan Kirsch, I believe, was rebutting a point you had made. And as he was talking, you interjected it's immoral to love your enemy. You were not given a chance to elaborate on that, so I'm going to give you that chance now. Thank you.
I think I can remember the event you're talking about. And I think it was in Los Angeles, wasn't it, at the book fair? Yes, I don't like being told, especially at a time like this, that it's my duty to love my enemies. People who want to go and love bin Laden can go do it on their own time. They're not to tell me that I'm to do the same, and they're certainly not to tell me that that's moral preaching. No, we have to hate our enemies and try and destroy them before they destroy us. That's a responsibility. To be neutral on such a point, especially if you're a father or if you consider yourself a citizen with duties to his fellow citizens, is wicked and should be described as such. Christianity is masochistic pabulum in that way. It actually disarms those of virtue and leaves them at the mercy of those who are wicked.
This is In Depth with Christopher Hitchens on Book TV. Denver, you're on the air.
Yeah, hi, Christopher, big fan.
Thank you.
I noticed you took some exception, maybe even umbrage at the notion that by invading Iraq, we've given bin Laden what he wants. And I wonder if you'll admit that the problem people maybe were trying to articulate with that statement is that the more or less secular or more or less civilian population of that region might become a larger substrate for these fundamentalist wackos like bin Laden when their civil society is destroyed and they're thrown out of work and their homes and maybe even their families are turned to ash. In other words, all guerrilla campaigns need the support of the population, and shouldn't we therefore do two things? One is address the legitimate complaints of the region and thus not increase the substrate for these right-wing guerrillas. And then couldn't we just go after the terrorists themselves? Thanks.
Well, you probably, since you kind of read my stuff, you probably know that I'm very dubious about the root cause argument with terrorism. I don't think that al-Qaeda terrorism comes, for example, from the denial of a Palestinian state. I don't think so. You may have noticed that when the al-Qaeda forces, with their Ba'athist allies, blew up the UN office in Baghdad to murder the great Sergio Vieira de Mello, the wonderful Brazilian human rights envoy who Kofi Annan had sent there. They said they'd done it to revenge themselves for his help in getting East Timor independence from Indonesia, East Timor being the Christian, formerly Portuguese island that was invaded and illegally occupied by Muslim Indonesia. So you see, if you want to make these people happy and address their complaints, you have to say, well, we'd be better off not of liberating. We'd be better off not having liberated. Excuse me, East Timor. Not a demand that can easily be met. If you really want al-Qaeda to go away, you have to let Pakistan take over Kashmir and tear the heart out of the Indian Federation and start a horrible religious war in the subcontinent. The cause of Islamist terrorism, in other words, as I'm saying to you, is the ideology of Islamic terror. That's what its root cause is. There are things we could perhaps have done on this substrate point of yours. I certainly think that keeping Iraq under sanctions for a dozen years, where Saddam Hussein was able to build a palace for himself in every one of Iraq's provinces, from the skim-offs of that sanctions racket, while the rest of the people were drinking sewer water, did help to create an underclass in Iraq of a kind it hadn't seen before. It certainly was no help to us or to the secular forces in Iraq when the situation imploded. But you're not to tell me that people blow up the sewer pipes in Iraq so that they can get better drinking water, or that they blow up the oil pipelines because they're out of a job, because that's one way of ensuring that they remain unemployed. No, the people who do this, the revolting jihadists who do it, are not the product of unemployment and poverty. They are the cause of unemployment and poverty. And until you get that distinction completely firmly fixed in your mind, you will always flirt with talking nonsense, as you just very slightly did a moment ago, if you don't mind my saying so.
Because of your strong statements against radical Islam, has there ever been a fatwa against you?
No, I don't think.
Have you ever gotten a threat?
Well, there wouldn't really. Well, that's an interesting question. There wouldn't really be a fatwa against me